around there. That was approved in capital that we looked at. Number 11 is that gazebo that you approved because we saw, hey, we saw additional uses for this gazebo. This is what we're going to do. Number 9 talks about a playground set. We have, I think, in our plan for capital to do a playground set looking at 2020, 2021. So just kind of looking at all this stuff is based off of what the core recommendations are. We're as a city, both, rec program, parks, DPW, we're continuing to do those operations. And I just want to kind of let you know this is what the plan that we're following. The other thing that we're making improvements to, I think what we talked about is every year we add beach, we add sand to the beach. We make sure that we make improvements to that every year as well. One of the suggestions was to finish the trail. If you follow my arrow around all the way, every year I throw that in the road program. It's about 20, what did I get a cost for that one? If you're looking at the sheet, it's about $23,000 to finish that off. I always throw that estimate in the road program. If we have extra money and it's doable, I get a cost estimate so I know what it is every year. So again, looking at all these core recommendations, and you should all go through them. It's a really good plan. You guys did a really good job as a committee to really kind of look at every part of it. So the next thing I just want to kind of do before I give this over to Tammy is we did just kind of a quick list thing of just kind of like seeing what we do out there on a daily basis. So again, DPW adds sand to the beach, yearly maintenance. We do the goose droppings of everything. DPW pressure washing building and picnic tables every year. DPW staff installs, removes, and maintains piers. We mow the park weekly. We oversee weed spraying. New boat information kiosk sign. It's all ordered. It's here. We're just going to install it. Trees near the new sign will be cut down. We already have kayak stand-up paddles for all the rental areas. That's already done. The parking stations are installed on a daily basis, so that's up and running. The cameras are installed and operating and monitoring on a daily basis, just to let you know. We got our new 2-year contract with the water bugs for the rental space. Remember that? That's 2 years. It includes every concession area except for the small concession area, which is only 158 square feet. That's all we have left to kind of rent out. New July 3rd celebration with the water bugs. We got that arranged this year. It was our first time last year. We're probably going to continue with it. The garbage is emptied daily at the park. We have a contract with Janet King to clean the bathrooms. There's 2 weed cutter boats that are docked on an island near 88 Fishing Pier with conveyor belts set up. Just be aware that's out there. Little Muskego Lake, we do the annual drawdown, 18 inches, mid-October. The water bug show is Wednesday night. Every night out there is a water bug show. Tuesday nights, there's a fishing tournament every Tuesday night. We don't control it. It's just all it's run. I talked about the 229 capital projects. You see for the capital for 2020, the new playground set, the estimate for the trail, and the one other thing that we did in October, due to the next thing when Tammy goes over some of the pictures and the videos of all the uses out there, we went and proposed to the park system of, should we rent these places? This is the only park that we don't rent pavilions at. We rent them at every one of our other parks. And we're looking at the fact that that's why we added that other one you approved for capital. So now we have 2 pavilion areas kind of do it. The gazebo does not have power. It doesn't have any water. It's just a simple gazebo down more of the ADA. So now I just want to kind of give you, for technology-wise, some of the things that to kind of give you guys an idea of what we have here.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
I forgot to mention that just due to timing, at 6 o'clock for the council meeting, we do have a public hearing, so I'm guessing we're not going to be done with this. I don't want you to worry, it won't be long. We will have to adjourn COW and go to the council meeting public hearing and then reconvene COW, but we have to because we have that public hearing, and I just don't think we're going to wrap it up that quick, but the council meeting shouldn't be long. Just want everybody to know that.
And that's why I gave you copies of everything. I'm throwing a lot of information at you guys. I'm sorry, but I've just given you the information that then you guys can have the healthy discussion of whatever you need to do. So, and I'm going to give it to Tammy right now.
So it was requested of me to go back through the security footage at Idle Isle and get some pictures of how the park is being used. And so I kind of tried to take different snippets of all of the weekends, pretty much from the end of July through August, just showing how the park area is used. So here, this picture shows that there's a large group outside of the shelter, there's a group under the shelter. In some of the pictures, you can see that they're in 3 to 5 different locations within the park. This group came in, used the shelter for 4 hours, came in, set up, had everything decorated, but there was nobody in the areas adjacent to the shelter at that time. This one, again, it's kind of where the cameras are located. It's very easy for us to pick up the multiple areas that people set up outside of the shelter plus underneath the shelter. We counted about 6 groups there because on the opposite side, so there's about 3 on this side, 4 depending on how people are set up. And then the next picture Scott has shows that there are 2 groups, very separate groups also outside of the shelter, all having an event in August. I'll go to the next one. This is, again, 3 very distinct groups. You can see how they're set up. Some of them don't come under the shelter because they want a little more sunlight. Some of them see the tables put together and think there's already an event going on, so they don't set up there. This one is a group came in and set up at 2 o'clock, set up all of the tables, brought in all their coolers and everything. Actually, the person came in at 9:58 in the morning, set everything up, and then nobody was underneath the shelter at all. That picture is taken at 2, and at 4 o'clock they ate. And as I'm watching the film footage between the cameras, when Scott goes to the next picture, that's the group that actually was eating underneath the shelter. So they set up all of their stuff under the shelter but stayed outside all morning so nobody else could use the shelter, and there were groups on the opposite side. Also wanting to point out, if you notice on the lake, if you can see that picture, there's 4 boats moored up on the shoreline, which is not allowed.
There's 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't allow the mooring, but again, these are what the cameras are showing you guys, what's going on.
Yeah.
So that's the person, this is a video of that person coming in at 9:58 to set up, and then, dropped off all their coolers, and then just pretty much everything sat there throughout the day with nobody being able to use that space. So this is just them coming in at 4:20 to start setting up to eat. Again, they were the large group over by the boat launch. There's another very large group over underneath the trees, having a picnic at the same time. You'll probably go to the next one. This is another just large group underneath the shelter. They were there for a large portion of the day. Another group outside the shelter set up tents, brought in their own tables. They have volleyball nets and stuff set up. This group chose to set up with tents and things closer to the fishing pier. This is 3 different groups. Somebody came in and started hanging up all their decorations and things for their event. And actually, if you kind of watch the video, one of the groups left because they were setting up so much stuff. So they had a rather large party by the time she got everything all set up. Go to the next one. This one, a group came in at 7:48 in the morning, moved all the tables, strategically placed chairs around so that nobody else could get into the space. This is actually a video of them setting everything up. And then, so it sat like that until I think 12 something when they showed up to actually start their party. But there's another group that's set up outside the shelter because the shelter wasn't available for them to use. And then 12:30 they started setting up for their event, and they had a very large party underneath the shelter. So that was about 6 weeks of Saturdays and Sundays.
It's just to kind of give you an idea that This is how our cameras are picking up the park usage to kind of give you guys an all idea of how it's being used on a weekend basis of everything with the multiple groups and everything out there. And these cameras do a good job to give you guys a little background that I think if you don't know what's going on. So that was just our quick presentation. You know, Scott Dickman is here to, any questions you have of him. You have his proposal. I gave you all copies of his proposal as well. And I guess I'm kind of going to leave it up to you for the next 9 minutes here to whatever you guys need to talk about.
Do you have any questions of the staff before we allow the presenter?
You mentioned here that the water bugs have a 2-year contract with Maddie's to provide concessions. Where do they provide the concessions?
From my understanding, a couple things occurred. One, when they did July 3rd, they went on the west side of the building there, and they did a full kind of setup there with a bar, a little bit bigger celebrations with it. I am not sure if they just use the concession stand during the actual water bugs, but it sounds like that's all they use. The larger one,
of the silver windows,
right here, this one where my arrows,
that's ours.
is that ours? This one? This one right here? See where my arrows pointed on the screen? That is the one that they use. They set up in
Maddie
there.
uses, or the water bugs?
Water bugs.
Waterbugs use, but Maddie, they contracted, what happened is Waterbugs doesn't have enough volunteer service to do the concession stands themselves. So what they did this year was they subcontracted out with Maddie's to run all their food during their events. It works out better for them. It's a win-win. So then when we did July 3rd, we brought them in, we said, why don't you have Maddie's? We worked with them too, and when they do that, then they take over the whole side of the building, and they bring a smoker in, they bring grills in, I think they bring a keg truck in too. It's a pretty big.
Or a food truck.
Yeah, food truck and I mean, beer truck too, because they sell beer and everything like
Like they
that.
had for Taste of Muskego. Is that,
They
Yeah.
did not have that this year, but that's.
right, that, in the
Yeah.
past?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Now, is that something we want to do with someone that we rent it out to, is subcontract stuff out? I mean, is that going through to approval through us, or they can just do that, or what?
for Maddie's,
Right.
it just worked out with the concession stand when
I
they
understand
did it.
It just worked out, but that's not the question. The question is that something that we want? Is that something we want to approve? Does it have to go through the city? Can they just say, okay, we're going to let
I'm
someone
going to
come here
defer
and
to
do
Jeff
this?
on that one because it was something that they had their agreement, they had the use of the concession stand.
Who did?
Water bugs. That's their thing.
That's totally different than subcontracting out, and that's my question.
And I think to answer that, if I jump in, probably going forward, we're going to treat it differently, but this just sort of happened.
Because I know when you're talking on this sheet here, we talked about first come, first serve. It's down here, set up policies, like that, and that would kind of fall in the same category for me. How do you get to that contract before everybody else gets it? That's, I don't know, whatever. I'm just leaving it at that.
I think literally what happened was we signed that deal with the water bugs and they realized they didn't have staff to do this.
Well, I understand that, but I was questioned by several businesses after that of how they were not able to have access to do that. It just happened, and nobody knows how it happened, and so I'm just bringing it up to
They
everybody.
should have come, they should have come to the city.
Well, that's right, but who should have came to the city?
The water bugs.
Waterbug should have come and said, we want to do this.
And Maddie should have, it's right, because now it's just like a hand.
Wasn't that handled as a one-time thing this past, on July 3rd? Seems to me it was one.
It's not.
That was the first time we did. I
First time
understand
with the
that.
July 3rd, but I think, I agree, what you're talking about is their Wednesday night events. They have an agreement with Maddie's that again, I'll be honest,
I'm
never
not sure
came to the
that's our
city.
agreement. That's not our agreement. That's what how I
correct.
look at it. So I'm not sure how that's gonna work.
To
I
clear-
don't know what the liabilities are and the whole thing on that, so.
Just to clarify your question, that the July 3rd is completely separate of this.
Yeah, that's
Right.
what I was
So we
pointing
just
out.
take that off the table, and that we were knowledgeable of,
That was
and
unique.
that's treated separately.
Okay, well, then the
So-
rest of the time when they're doing on Wednesday nights, I thought, we don't allow liquor in the park.
Well, they did have to get a permit, I believe,
Jill, they got a permit, right?
Do they have a permit?
for Wednesdays or not?
I don't remember hearing anything. This is first I heard about every Wednesday now that Maddie's gonna do this.
That's a little
I
troubling
looked at
if
that
we
on the
never approved
contract
it.
here. This is the first time I've seen anything. It's right now in my hand.
Yeah, I didn't know
I
Maddie was
honestly,
involved
we
at
can look
all.
into that because I just can't remember. I'm being
Well,
honest.
and I'm gonna go back to July 3rd. That's some of the complaints I had is, how did they get the contract and nobody knew about it? So we need to make that available for everybody and so businesses are all treated fairly on this situation. So July 3rd last time was a separate deal. This July 3rd should be handled properly.
How does that interfere with the beach bistro plan? They want to use the same area, right?
No, they have a separate door there that Waterbugs does not have.
Yeah, but
Waterbugs only has
concession
part of
area.
that concession. They only have that one part of the concession. Isn't there 2 concession doors? So we're talking separate concession.
Which one?
Bigger one,
The
Waterbugs.
water bugs have the larger, which is the one
Okay.
with the arrow on it, but Beachy Bistro is asking to use both spaces.
Yeah, okay, so there is a conflict.
And as long as we have a pause,
Get
and
2
it's-
minutes.
like 1 minute shy of 6 o'clock, if that's okay, then we can get into the full proposal. So do I get a motion to adjourn?
To adjourn.
A motion to adjourn, and we will reconvene after the council meeting. So is there a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We'll roll into council
So
and come
they're-
back.
They're requesting both doors. I thought they were requesting one.
Do we have to go to the full council meeting? Can't we?
Oh. Yeah. I was going on page 3 because the first
I
time I
do
saw it.
not know. Maybe
I haven't
Scott
got that far
knows.
yet. I started speaking.
Okay.
Well, that's going to interfere with contract with Waterbug, isn't it? What's that? Quite a few issues here.
Yeah.
Waterbug's doesn't contract with Waterbug.
Yeah. I agree with you. We should sit down with all the different cities and just see what's going on. Yeah, that's what you said.
You go now
Okay?
about somebody going in.
All right, I'm going to reconvene the committee of the whole meeting at 6:33 PM. And,
You'll need a roll call again.
roll call, he said.
Alderman Madden.
Here.
Alderman Kubaki.
Here.
Alderman Engelhardt.
Here.
Alderman Kapusta. Alderman Borkman.
Here.
Alderman Hamel.
Here.
Alderman Wolf.
Here.
We have a quorum present.
Thank you. Okay, we left off. Where do we want to?
I think I hate to say this, the last one was Alderman Wolf was just questioning what happened with the Maddie's kind of arrangement with the water bugs. I think that was just your last thing, well, why wasn't done, or this is the first time you heard of it and everything. Again, referred to Jeff, I think when we did that contract, and I just was talking to Tammy, no one knew that Maddie's was going to run it. It was just going to go on before as the water bugs were doing what they were doing of selling the concessions. And then I think Tammy and I both realized it was sometime in July that we found out that they subbed that out to them. Now, I know Jeff has to look at the contract, and I'm trying to remember from my point, I don't even know if anything was ever in there, one way or another, of rules of subleasing, and maybe Jeff
Yeah,
can.
I doubt if there was anything in there, but getting back to what Alderman Wolf said, I mean, this is something that in the future we just have to look at.
Correct.
It just happened, and that's sad to say.
Because I thought it was just the July. just
July
for the-
3rd, but-
For the 3rd, right?
Right.
The
Yeah.
event that,
And as
because
far,
it came up at a certain moment and somehow they got it and they were there and I just think it needs to be done properly. That's just
It's
my
not fair to
my
others,
opinion.
right?
and
Yeah.
to make it clear as far as alcohol sales, that's not or should not be happening on Wednesday. There is no license, because I think the question did come to the city, and there's not even, we can't even license that.
Well, we're doing the beer trailer or whatever we do in Veterans
Beer garden.
Beer Garden. And that's all upfront and the way it should be.
That's
so.
a contract signed, right?
Right, and that's the only beer that I know that's being sold, so I didn't even know that Maddie's was doing every week there, because the Waterbugs used to do their own concession stand, right?
Correct. And what happened was they have volunteers, and the amount of volunteers has gotten down low enough where they don't have volunteers to do the concession stand anymore. So they hired or subcontract out the baddies to do that work. So,
I understand that, but
Yeah.
it's a club, it's not a right, so.
yeah,
So-
no, it's definitely, I think you make a very valid point, and it's something, again, which is nice, is these agreements are only 2 years, which is really good. So next year, that's the second year of the agreement, and then in December, we start negotiating and looking at it again. So by Jeff's recommendation, only 2-year agreements, we can kind of catch these things and not be long.
You know, I understand that, but yeah, but the point is now for July 3rd and every Wednesday, what are we going to be doing for next year? That's not part of our agreement for the 2 years.
The July 3rd, again, is completely separate. That goes through a whole separate process for special events. It
we
has
should
nothing to
probably-
do with any of this discussion, so.
Right,
it's
right, but we
irrelevant.
need
What
a
about
process.
Wednesday nights?
Other people can be invited to it.
What about the Wednesday nights?
Wednesday nights, that's part of this discussion.
Part of this discussion.
Yeah.
That's
Are
what
we
I'm talking about for
obligated
next year.
by some kind of contract to continue allowing water bugs to use that concession area?
Okay, if I can real quick, we do have a 2-year agreement. I'm sure our city attorney here will tell us we have to honor that. As far as their subletting, they did it this year. That season's over. We can still talk to them
Could stop
about the
it.
next year.
That's what I'm
for the
talking about.
subletting. That we can do, but they have the space for the next year, no matter what, because we've
Right,
entered
right.
that
I
agreement.
understand that.
So we can't even really do this thing because they want to start this in mid-May of 2019. So they could not start in mid-May of 19 if we're obligated to give the space to the water bugs in May of in all of 19.
From that aspect, yes.
Yes.
Okay, so
But-
so why are we on
Wait.
this if we can't do it?
Well, okay, then, as long as you brought that up, and I guess I'd like to point out what Scott brought up from the very beginning is in the comprehensive plan and RFP, and then he and I did a little talking, and then I talked to Jeff here, our attorney, on trying to understand that, which is a very, very good thing that was put in there. An RFP, and they're done in every other municipality, counties, whatever, in regional parks, if they're going to do something like this. And an RFP is so that the governing body can determine what they're looking for to provide to the users of the park. And then they create that RFP for that purpose. And they put it out there, and then they receive those proposals. And it's also, as our attorney would tell us, it's a fairness thing, and that's why government does it, so that everyone has an opportunity that wants to use a space if that's what the council so chooses. So that's the purpose of an RFP. And then following an RFP, which I learned about recently, are P3 agreements, which all these government entities then enter into, which involves lease and also a piece of the,
Payback, right.
because it's publicly owned property, the community has to get something back. So they would get a piece of the profit is basically what these agreements are very typical. So we didn't even get to talk to them about that. So just to set the tone there, that's kind of what is the normal process.
But if we have a contract for at least
For
next
next
year
year.
with the water bugs, they'd have to relinquish their interest in the contract, right? Neil, is that right?
Well, that's what I'm hearing, that we're
Yes.
trying to lease something, or that he wants to lease something that's already leased.
That's correct.
Well, it's not 100% leased, there's a piece
Well,
that's
no,
open,
well, the
right?
area that he wants is
Well,
leased.
part of it is leased, of the area he wants,
Well,
right?
All but 150 square feet, and I don't think.
But I mean,
don't
I just want to point that out, that's all.
You know, I agree that this is, that the bistro or the would be a better use for that. I'm not sure it would be you know, Scott's a good businessman. He knows if it's going to fly or not. I don't. But if, you know, I think what we have in our comprehensive plan and what we have in our park plan and Scott's thing are all in unison with one another. But it just seems to me that we can't do it in 19 because we've already leased that area out. And then in 20, I don't know if we can simply change our agreement with the water bugs to say, well, you've had it all these years, but now you don't anymore.
You can do that. I mean, There's no.
Do you want to, I think is
Oh,
what
do
he's
you
really
want to?
saying.
I see what you mean. You can. I thought you meant can you, yeah.
Well, yeah, it's both.
Was that
It's
lawyer
both.
in you?
Yeah, I mean,
Because at what point do we stop our obligation to them?
Well, they're not using it as a concession stand right now. They're
Yes,
subbing
yes,
it
they
out.
are. Well, yeah, but it's used
They
for their,
can't-
it's used for their, for their
I
shows.
understand that. I understand that, but if they can't use it the way that they were designed to use in a lease, that's different than what they're doing now.
No, that's true, but I'm not sure that that's really part of the discussion either.
Well, it would have to become part of it after the lease expires, when you put a new lease together.
I'd like to make one point, even though right now, those areas are stored with their stuff in it for the full time. So even though they're not using those things, their equipment, their stuff is staying there and they pay that rent and it's being used by them for the material. So even though they're not operating on it, all their stuff is in there. So
right.
it's not like you can just move their stuff if they have an agreement. I just wanted to make sure that you're all aware that that stuff is still in there right now.
We
But
had
that wouldn't be disturbed by the development. It'd stay the way it is. I mean, their storage area would stay the same. The only thing the water bugs would lose would be their losing venture on selling concessions that they gave to a third party.
But they're only selling the concessions because they didn't have the ability to do it.
Right.
Now, the Beachy Bistro would kind of resolve that problem as well.
I imagine Scott is looking more for a sit-down thing rather than a carry-out thing.
I don't know if that really makes a difference, you know.
Well, can we go back one step? And that step is, what use do we want to make of this park? I mean, if we want to, it seems to me we have a couple options. One is to put a restaurant or whatever there. The second option is to open those areas up for rentals. And if we're saying no, we would rather have that, that's fine. But that's the first decision we have to make, I think, is to decide what we want to do at the park.
I think we had some of that conversation.
Didn't we decide that with the plan?
We kind of did. I think we talked about at one point that there used to be a business in there and tried to make a go of it, and we thought it was a good idea, I think, as a whole.
Well, then fine. I mean, then we're on the right path, and then this is the next step in the venture. But it seems that we can't do anything until 2020 anyway.
Yeah, and at that time, I don't know if this proposal is even going to be valid or be there, you know? I mean,
Right.
it might be totally changed by then.
Could we take a few minutes and hear from Scott? I'd like to hear what his thoughts are and what he's proposing.
Come on up.
Scott Dickman, S69W17945 Muskego Drive. So, you know, I understand to Neil's point that the water bugs currently do have a lease through 2020? 2019. So they had last year and this year. And they did technically, you know, without your knowing, sublease to Maddie's, which is, you know, they're just trying to make some money out of there for Wednesdays. I think as a whole, the discussion you're having here is very good. From the standpoint of the water bugs, if they don't have enough people to staff that and they're outsourcing it basically, then why not let us have that discussion with them to say, okay, what are you truly gaining from this? Because that lease is, you know, we don't need that back part. Basically, we're looking for the front two places, as well as the pavilion underneath there. And Tammy and Scott provided a good overview of what the use is. And we were at the Park and Rec meeting a couple weeks ago. You know, we discussed this as well. You know, I mean, as I mentioned then, you know, I'm fortunate enough to live on the lake, and Christy and I had gone past that Idle Isle almost every day via boat, different times of the day, just to kind of see what is going on. And the pictures justify that. Like I had mentioned at the Park and Rec meeting, that you have one group of people that come to this pavilion, set up shop, and people will find other places to go within the park or bring tents or whatever. But back to the water bugs piece, I think that it would be good for them. It's an advantage to have a venue such as ours there, because it may bring more additional people that may have not come to the water bug show before, potentially. I don't know that, but I'm going to assume that. Secondly, we would be not just taking over that, we'd be taking over the pavilion. As you saw in the pictures and the proposal, it's a little bit more entailed in that. And yes, there was a private business in there, the ice cream shop, and I forget what was in there prior to that. Unfortunately, they weren't successful. But again, this whole thing with the water bugs, again, I know that they were part of this years ago, with raising funds and stuff like that for the new building. But, again, it's really up to the committee of the whole common council to decide if you want to move forward with something like this. And again, the discussion with them, they have one more year. We're not taking anything in the back. That's where they store all of their stuff. And primarily, there's nothing else that's stored in that upper, larger area. Does that make sense?
So they actually have things stored in there?
No, they use the back room, Neil, that large area. That's where they store all their skis and all their equipment. There's nothing really stored in that other room except for, the refrigerators that are in there, whatever. That's just for their concession sales, of which I think it was probably like the 4th ski show that Maddie's came in because they didn't have enough people. And to be quite frank, I mean, I go to a few ski shows during the course of the year, and generally speaking, there's not a whole lot of sales coming out of it. I don't even know what kind of revenue they generate. And if it was my guess, Maddie probably just does it, gives them, X amount of dollars, even though he didn't take that amount of money in, and says, here you go, as kind of a donation. That would be my guess. And as far as one of the questions you had as far as sit down, yeah, I mean, there is sit down there. There is, if somebody wanted to, pull up and grab something to go. It's a limited menu. This is not a huge menu here because of the space, but that would be our intention. And we would be operating for roughly 4 or 5 months out of the year, maybe some weekends toward the latter part of the year, as like Labor Day comes along at the end of the year and people are back to school and stuff like that.
Well, for us to move, our hands are kind of tied right now, Scott. For us to move ahead, we'd have to have the water bugs relinquish their lease, essentially, of that building for 2019. And
I'm not, to relinquish the lease of the entire building or the 2 pieces that they currently have, again, it's not the back piece. That's the main area. And I hear what you're saying.
Of the area that you would use.
Right. So, and I'm willing to have that discussion with them, or I can do it individually, or if you want to broker something with me and them, and we can all just sit down and have a discussion about it, I'm more than willing to do that. Just from a business perspective, though, for somebody to have a lease and then sublease without somebody knowing about it really isn't the right way to do business. And I'm sure there was no, intentional, misconduct that they wanted to have there, but, it's something that you should have been notified about. And again, I think that we could work something out. We're talking about a small piece that didn't generate a lot of revenue, in my opinion, based upon my observation. So I think if we sat down, we had a discussion with them to see what we could potentially work out, I think it could be a win-win for everybody, if that makes sense.
That seems to be the way that we have to go.
Yeah, I think that we don't want to broker anything. I think that would be a discussion between you guys. Would that be correct?
Would you have any
But
opportunity?
the only thing I want to caution you is before you have him spend all his time, there's a much bigger discussion, because I don't know if you're aware that he wants to enclose the pavilion. It's taking over the pavilion, as he said.
Well, I think the first part of it would have to be his discussion to see if it's even possible to get to
No,
that.
your discussion would be following comp plan. Do you want to go through an RFP process? It's my understanding there was another local restaurant that might have been interested as well, which is what our attorney here would say, is do the RFP, but also determine, I mean, there's much to talk about with parking, dumpsters, trash pickup. There's far more than just this little conversation. And so I guess at minimum, before you have him spend all his time, I'd rather you ask Scott to come back with some sample RFPs and P3 agreements so that you understand, everybody understands the scope of what you're looking at. So you have parameters and you know, he knows, everybody knows. And there's no figuring it out as you go, because then that's when you start to have issues with everybody.
But, you know, you said there's other businesses that came forward, not to my knowledge, and to think about it and ask about it is not the same as having a plan about it. So, I don't know what that all meant.
I think what I'm trying to say here is though, is how it's done, it's still a publicly owned property.
I understand all that, right.
And so the council has to determine, do they want to remain at a park and a pavilion for the people to use as they're currently using? Because you're taking it away. You're not saying that they're just going to do this on Wednesday nights. That pavilion goes away. That's a comprehensive conversation you have to have, because that's going away.
Mm-hmm.
And all those people that you saw in that pavilion that they were going to rent out now will no longer have that ability. And I think the public needs to weigh in. They use the park.
Well, you got to have a public
So that's why
hearing, you're right.
I think we need to have a bigger discussion of how you see this park going forward, what an RFP looks like if you want to go down that avenue, and what a P3 agreement looks like. I just think otherwise you're going to be reacting and you're going to be figuring out as you go, and then you're going to have people yelling, and it's not good.
No, that's
You want to make sure you're doing it right, so the people who live in the area, the people who use the park, everybody's on the same page and understands.
So I understand where you're coming from with what you're saying. I guess, going back to, well, there's a differentiator there, so I answer my own question. And I guess the only other thing with respect to the RFP is that, I did come forward with a formal proposal. I understand in the comprehensive plan, that these are things that, kind of guidelines as to what's what. I just caution when it comes to an RFP, because there's a lot of devils in the detail, which I'm sure he's aware of, that have to be very, very specific. I think that I came forward with this, and that Scott and Tammy, Christine and I, sat down and we got a lot of information and gave a lot of information with respect to what we're doing. I mean, it's not detailed as to what our full business plan is, which I wouldn't do, and I mentioned that in the Park and Rec as well. However, we came forward with a lot of this information, and it's pretty simple for somebody to take my information and Christina's that we put together and then run with it. And from my perspective, I'm just a little bit cautious of that.
And it doesn't mean council go that route, but I think they have to look at everything so that they understand, including parking, P3 agreements, and everything else, because the public owns.
Can you describe what a P3 agreement is?
Scott, could you know it better than I do.
And before you do that, this is all brand new in front of me today at the meeting. It'd have been nice to know about it beforehand. And then to back that up before that, it'd been nice to know about the P3 beforehand, so that we would be intelligent right now on where we're going. Because we started going into this, and then we backed up and talked about something we have to do before we can even do this. We should have did that the other way around. So in the future, I'd like to see it.
Well, that's kind of unusual what you're asking, because typically what we do, this is discussion night,
Right.
to give you an idea. And I know that Mr. Dickman here would like to go really fast, but you know how we are at government, we have to go through the process.
Understand all that,
We have to
yeah.
first know on a level where if you even want to entertain it. And then the staff will spend time and bring those things forward. But there's no decisions that would be made tonight anyhow. This is just
And we have
discussion.
another year lease in our way too.
Right, so I mean, there is time, I know you'd like to get going, but we have to dot all our i's and cross all our t's, but now Scott can enlighten us a little on what a P3.
But I still feel that I'm working backwards instead of forward on how we're doing this, and
Well, that's what, we'll bring the information so that we couldn't inundate you with everything either, maybe you didn't even want any of it, so we'll go through it slowly, go ahead.
Common P3s, private-public partnerships, okay? You're seeing these more as big as like doing a huge transportation project, or as small as, I guess the best examples are, think of Lake Park Bistro. think of down North Point Custard Bar. I'm using current kind of little examples of what, something that Mr. Dickman would like to propose. It's an agreement where some of those places, like a North Point Custard Bar, is owned by the Milwaukee County Parks. They put an RFP out probably for a specific thing. We want to use as specific as, we would like this place to be as maybe as specific as serving these 4 or 5 items, and whatever. They go out, they get an RFP for it, and they choose the best one based off of what they're looking for in that park. From that private-public partnership is basically the Lake Park Beast, or the North Point Custard Bar. Bartolotta's runs it. They have a set time of when they run it. The Milwaukee County Parks collects a certain percentage of that revenue. Now, they are now to the point of even doing is North Point invested a lot of their own money into making that building. That building never really looked like that. Now it looks like a custard stand. So now you start, again, these are very complicated scenarios because North Point or Bartolotta spent a lot of money on doing upgrades. Okay, however, they got the land free. So it's at risk. If that agreement between Milwaukee County Parks and North Point and Bartolotta's goes south, okay, in that agreement, does that custard stand and all those benefits become part of Milwaukee County now that they own? Because, why? They had an opportunity in RFP to be at a special location. Now you're not even talking now, what about rent? You guys got to think of, it's prime real estate. You are prime real estate in this island that we have. Not many other places along Little Muskego Lake to do it. You have to justify, well, is this a good rent? Is this not a good rent? There's a lot of risks. Jeff will have to go through these agreements. There's both risk a lot on whoever does it, because after, let's say we do a 2-year agreement and we choose to put it out for an RFP again, but Mr. Dickman invested a lot of time and money into this building, but then we say, guess what? We want to go a different way. So this puts a lot of risk both on whoever's going to do it and the people like our city to look at this.
Well, that's what you guys do. We look at the big picture of this. I mean, do we want to do this? I mean, you guys can work out these details. I don't want to be involved in that at all.
But that's, I think.
And neither does this committee. I guess we're charged with the responsibility at this point of saying, do we want to go ahead with this? Can you put together some basics of an RFP?
There are so many examples. I can give you plenty of examples.
I don't want to know I don't want to know all those details. My question is, can you guys put together a very simple RFP, put that out there? That seems to be the first point of this. And if we get no response, which I'm pretty confident that we won't, then we can start to go ahead with a specific proposal, one that we have on the table right now. As far as your 3P agreement or whatever you called, you guys figure that out. We're just here for the big picture of this.
Okay, I guess then if I'm taking the step back and looking at the big picture
Yeah.
before the RFP, like public hearing, great idea. The other thing too is, what do you want there from the public? Do you want his type of restaurant? Do you want a mac and cheese restaurant? Are you looking for a custard stand?
We'll do the
Are you
same thing
looking
we do
for?
with the
wait.
building that we're.
Before you go there, can I?
But I'm just saying, if bigger picture, that with the public hearing.
This is more conceptual right here, so I want to be careful here, and I don't want it to come out bad, but what Kevin is just saying is correct. It's a conceptual thing, and what it is right now is a park. And it's a park for swimming and picnicking and all kinds of things. And what Scott and Tammy just presented is the pavilion was going to be rented out. I don't know why it never was before. So it's a bigger picture thing that you have to look at, is that a pavilion you want to completely remove from the public's ability to use. Then the next question, and then so you're moving a little bit away from a park. The second question is, what do you want to put a for-profit business, a restaurant in there? And if so, you have to address all the parking and everything else. I mean, we go through all kinds of things for Plan Commission all the time. And you have to understand, every restaurant owner in this city would say, well, I want that sweet deal too. We have to be a little careful with this, but the parking has to be addressed, the additional traffic, that if Mr. Dictum is really successful, that's going to bring other headaches. I don't know that it will be, but there's going to be a lot of traffic in those roads. You just have to talk about all that. To put it on Scott to just do an RFP is not appropriate. You guys have to determine, do you want to displace the people in the park? Then that tells him how he writes the RFP. Or do you want to just supplement something, a service to the people who are in the park? That's what has to be, there's so much that has to be talked about. And then there's alcohol that's being proposed. And the chief is here to say that there's issues with that because we have, that you guys have to work out, be part of an RFP if you go this route, is we do the beer picnic permits. So you have to differentiate, so if there's walls going to be put up on the pavilion, which now keeps the public out, but they own the building yet, so that's a whole nother issue legally, because they should be able to use it, but let's say we go that route, now you'd have to keep that, you should consider keeping that alcohol confined in those four walls, because otherwise how can they police it, and then also police the beer picnic permits? So those are things the chief brought to me. There's just, if you think there's a one simple answer here, I'm sorry, there's not. And it would be nice if it was, but there's a lot into this. And you guys have to make those decisions, not Scott.
Well, I think the examples that Scott gave us are examples of pavilions or places in parks that are probably being used better than they were before. And according to our cameras, you know,
It's not very,
it wasn't very friendly use.
no, it's
The way
not
people were
used
blocking
by
stuff
any more
off at
than
9
one
o'clock
group a
and
day
leaving.
anyhow. Because it's set up, because people camp out there. But, why is this, we're getting all about this, you can't do this because it's public property and it's a park and all that.
We're not saying that. You
what
got
do
to
we-
decide which way you want to go.
What do we do, or why is this all that different from like when the baseball groups build a diamond, which they did in Park Arthur? I mean, they spent $50,000 on building themselves a ballpark.
Or the
on our-
festival.
And the city spent $5 million, and the public gets to use those diamonds. They are not reserved specifically for
No,
those.
They can't
no,
walk
ma'am.
on or any time and use them.
Not the major, not the one that's fenced in. No, they do not use that one. They get to use the other ones.
And there's
but the-
tournaments and
the-
everything else
the-
going
on.
the
Can
big-
you address
the-
that?
The 90-foot diamond, they do not get to use.
The 90-foot, the field number 4, the big field, is available for anybody to use. They come through the office and book it, and we've had tournaments there and other things.
Yes.
It's not
You-
locked.
Yeah,
It's not locked and it's gated, but it's not locked.
but it's not, I mean, it's just, you just can't walk up and use it. You have
Yes,
to
you
come
can.
through the gate.
Well,
You have to go through the
it could be
gate,
in
but
use
there's
already
also-
and you want to use it.
And there's
I
also
don't-
field.
One at a
there's-
time, please.
It's used for
There's
tournaments and things like
Sure,
that.
and it's used for games and it's used for practices, and when people rent the shelter, they get access to either field 4 or 1, 2, or 3, which are also all fenced in as well
Okay,
now.
but why is this, I mean...
It's public property, so the public can
We've
use
had a lot
it.
of these partnerships in the past
the
with
festival-
private
festival
industry or
committee.
private groups. and
Okay,
it's
once
all
again,
turned
we
out
can
very
do
well.
it, so I'm going to expedite this. Would you like Scott to come back with just a very basic RFP to allow for the proposal that's before you, at least I should say, no, that's not that one. An RFP that just at least lays out closing off the pavilion for public use, and it would be for private use. Would you like an RFP for that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think...
Then at least Scott has some direction, otherwise he can't just pull it out of the sky. Okay, he'll work on that, and I can't guarantee it'll be at the next meeting though, because he's got work to do, so we'll see.
Well, to me, a major part of any kind of RFP would be what the rental's going to be on that structure. And hopefully,
There's going to be a lot of work involved in this, yes.
I realize that. I realize that.
I understand, yeah, but at least he has some kind of marching orders.
It's not a simple thing. That's why we have
This is
always
not a
talented
simple thing.
here.
No,
Talented people.
it's not. Yes.
So we're talking about a pavilion, and I understand it's, the city owns it, and we're looking at, I have to remember roughly here now, let's call it 800 square feet, 900 square feet underneath. That's what we're talking about, with a roof over it. The reason why we're looking at that is because we have the facilities to lock up from a kitchen perspective. if we're looking at about an 800 square foot piece of something for people to go under, then I would rather have a discussion with whomever to see what would it truly cost. And I've checked like at Menards for what lumber costs are. If we did a 16-foot gazebo, even if you did a square one, a round one, a 20 by 20, you're looking at 400 square feet. And as you noticed in those pictures that Scott and Tammy provided, they're not totally utilizing that all day anyway. All they're doing is camping their stuff there to eat for a purpose and then leave it. So I know that we had earmarked money for the pavilion, or for the smaller little pavilion or whatever by the fishing pier. I guess I would propose, from my standpoint, at least throw it out on the table, then why don't we take a look, I don't know if it's collectively, or me, Scott, whomever, and say, okay, if we were to build just a pavilion for people to use and maybe run one thing of electric over that can handle a slow cooker, or to plug in a radio or something of that nature, what is that going to cost? Because if it's like, we're talking $6,000, $8,000, I'm willing to invest in something like that. I think that even if I was at 50-50, I don't want to have, this extraordinary amount of money, but I think that would give another option to relinquishing this small piece that's used by one group of people 12 weeks out of the year, maybe. That's my point. And I offered this up at Park and Rec, correct? I said, this is something that I'd be willing to look at. And it's another thing for this, and there are a lot of moving parts to this. I agree. This isn't a very simple discussion like, okay, let's do this, boom, and here it is. I get it. And this is where Tammy and Scott, Chrissy and I have had conversations about the parking. We've had discussions about the trash removal. We've had discussions about how much power we need, the restroom facilities. We have those answers. We provided those answers. So it's there. A lot of it's there already. But I think we're looking at a small piece here, and we're letting this little tiny blip take over the whole conversation. Does that make sense? So I'm willing to look at some of that and offer that. Not 100%, but I think it may be another viable solution. Where would that be placed? I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, it is something that I'm willing to consider.
That's
Okay.
pretty much the same thing we did with Twisted Cork. One of four business property needed additional parking, and we wanted a parking lot in one of our parks. We allowed them to build it at their cost.
Okay, so I think, because what I'm hearing is, so I'm going to ask for, actually, you would prefer a motion, right? So I'm just throwing it out there by listening to all of you, that what Scott can bring back to, and I'm not promising it'll be the next meeting, because, again, there's a lot of work that has to be done with this. A basic RFP, whether you go that route or not, and then a P3 agreement, so that you can understand and see what that is, what that'll mean, and have some discussion on those. But he can't fill in numbers without information from you. I'm just going to say that right here and now. No staff person can do that. Only you guys can make those determinations. But he can help guide by bringing that stuff forward.
And I guess, the other thing with this, the whole moving parts piece with, what would this lease look like or agreement? If those numbers don't work and you come back with some number that don't work, I already have it built into my pro forma. I'm not going to disclose what that is. But if it doesn't work, the numbers don't work, this is a done issue for me.
Understood.
Okay. So I just want to throw that out there too, because, it is a limited amount of space, et cetera. So, and I'm not sure what what the investment is downtown, but the traffic downtown versus what's here. I know what the water bugs pay for storage and all of that, for the use of that all year long, because quite frankly, to be totally honest with everybody here, is if the water bugs weren't storing their stuff in the back, you could literally blow up in both walls and have 2 pavilions there.
Yep.
With the concessions in between. So I'm just, I'm taking a look at this from a lot of different perspectives. So this number piece is a big deal to me too. And the RFP route concerns me personally a bit, because I've done a lot of legwork for this, a lot of discussions, it's public knowledge, and they can answer that RFP, and then it comes up to this, to the point where you have to make a decision of, is it Christie and I, or is it, somebody else? And that worries me when I brought this forward, because it's the same thing when Kristen brought forward the ice cream shop. There wasn't a whole lot of discussion there. It just happened. Not to say that's a bad thing, but that's what happened. So I just want to say about these numbers, it's a big deal.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you. So I will be looking for a motion for Scott to bring forward a basic RFP and P3 agreement for more discussion.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you. And again, I'm not promising what meeting that's at, because this isn't the only thing on his plate, and there's going to be a lot to look into. Okay, with that, I have nothing else. Is there a motion to adjourn? So moved.
Turn, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.
And all the price and everything.
I've got his
that's already
proposal.
been taken. Because we gave it to the ice cream.
You personally Friday, hopefully I have. Yep.